Everybody, Invisiblekatana here, and today I would like to discuss whether or not video game adaptations work better in animation or live action. So I wanted to do this because it's something that's, of course, with the rise, I would say, of video game adaptations as of late. Not that they're anything new, of course, Resident Evil has had, I think technically is still the most profitable franchise as far as, a game franchise getting something in movie form with just the first 6 films, not even counting, Welcome to Raccoon City. But it's the perfect example to bring up where it's like, hey, we got 7 live action movies, 1 live action show, a lot of all bad pretty much, except for like the first Resident Evil movie is like the only one I really like. But we got a bunch of live action stuff, but there's a bunch of CG movies as well. And they've been doing CG movies for a long time. And I think honestly, they had to have been the first company, Capcom of course, being the first ones to be like, hey, we have an insanely popular franchise. We have all these live action films that are obviously in no way, shape, or form canon to the games. Why don't we actually fill in the gaps between the games and show the characters doing things between, 4 and 5, or 5 and 6, or 6, 7, 8, and so on and so forth. And I like the movies that we have. Obviously, some are better than others. There are some that are like really cool, and then there are others where it's like, okay, that was okay, it was fine. And that's, I think natural just for any story in general. I wish that all of them had like, the most top tier writing and graphics and everything. But that's the perfect example as far as live action versus CG. And it's not just from a writing perspective, because let's be honest, it's not the fact that it's in live action that the movies aren't good. It's the fact that they were like, we're just gonna do whatever we want and do weird things. And then, we made 3 movies, or, we made 2 movies, and then the 3rd movie comes out. It's like a little time skip. The whole world is plummeted into chaos, and it's just like all the water is like dried up and everything. It's like all desert all of a sudden. And like, that wouldn't even happen in a couple years, even with the zombie apocalypse. And then the next movie is like, yeah, it's just like over here it's really bad, and these cities are kind of bad. But it's like, you acted like the entire world just ran out of water. And then of course they retconned that franchise like 3 separate times where they just kept changing whatever they wanted out of nowhere. So it's definitely more writing than it is, hey, they got live action zombies, or they went, or didn't go to the Spencer Mansion or anywhere else. But there's tons of other adaptations where it's like, hey, all right, let's check out some anime. We got, the Castlevania anime, just Netflix. We'll just go Netflix anime. We got the Netflix anime, although Devil May Cry, of course, did have an older anime as well. It didn't, it wasn't super action heavy. It was more, character focused. So, there's that dichotomy of that versus the new Netflix show, which once again strays away from the main source. So this isn't, a writing thing. This is more just in terms of, should we get stuff that's more based on, animation or, CG animation, or should it be live action? I would love to know your thoughts on that. So going through it, going back to Resident Evil, I always thought the concept of a live action Resident Evil show would be really cool. It would certainly work. It would be, oddly enough, very simple to start. I think if we're being totally honest, you could do 0, 1, and maybe even 2 relatively simple. Because they all are just like indoors. You have like one little outside section. You do the introduction for 2 in the city and stuff, and you could even take it from the remake where it's at the gas station or whatever, or just do it like, boom, they're in the city, and that's where Claire and Leon meet up. But once you get to 3, it's like, all right, well, now you got to do the whole city. You get to 4, you got to do like the whole village, then the castle, then the laboratory, and that. And obviously they all have labs in some way, shape, or form. But all of those, like, they really start to shift at that point. Like, even Code Veronica has what I would consider, as far as the old style, even though it doesn't have camera angles, it's still in the older style. Even that has, I think, some of the most varied locations for it being like a prison island, where it's like, here's like the more prisoner side of things, and then here's the barracks, and then here's the mansion, here's an effing submarine that goes to like an underwater location. Like, there's a lot of stuff that would be very difficult going further and further into the Resident Evil franchise in live action. And then if you did it with animation, easy peasy. You just draw whatever you want to draw, like doing the Crimson Heads, and doing even the action itself, I think, is the perfect example of that. And to jump on that, I'll jump over to The Last of Us. The first season of The Last of Us, one of the big issues was like, hey, they kind of cut out a buttload of the moments where they fight clickers, or they just fight the infected in general. And it's like, okay, I mean, you had like a cool moment in the early part, like in the city, and they had like the original like clicker sequence in the museum, which was almost like 1-to-1, like that straight up looked like the museum that it does in the actual game. It was like, this is amazing. Like, I remember how that museum looks in the game, and they pretty much recreated it 100%. And I loved it, and it was great. And that fit for that sequence, which was there's these three people going through this scary segment, and then there's a bunch of clickers around, and it's, you know, it's scary. And then after that, it was kind of like, all right, well, they fought some people. Of course, they do that in the game. And then, you know, they changed the stuff for the spores versus like the little tendrils and stuff like that, which it works either way, you know, causing like the bum rushing of just absolute insanity. So it does get fairly interesting. But they definitely cut out some elements where it's like, hey, them fighting the infected actually was like a relevant part of the story. Like, it's not just you fighting the people. Like, it's a part of the story that sometimes they just end up in crazy situations. Like, I think the David episode is the perfect example of that, where they didn't do any of the fighting where they actually have to team up with each other before finding out the truth. And even with that episode, one of the things that bugged me was that they kind of spoil it to begin with, because you don't know like what's going to happen in the game. You just assume like this is just a dude, and it's like you don't know who to trust. And then it seems okay, and then you guys fight and team up and save each other's lives. And then it's like, oh, we kind of bonded a little bit. And then, you know, rug pull, and it's like, oh, this is bad. And then the show, it was like, all right, well, you know, instant rug pull moment. It's like, oh, okay. But we also knew it was going to be bad because of how you changed it. And it was like, had they just put the effort into simply doing the money perspective and, you know, having that not be a factor, it would have been like, they totally would have done more of the CG. They would have done more of the monsters. That is, if anything, I think that's the most important part to have the infected show up, is during that sequence, just to give you that sense of bonding with David as a character, and then it adds to the change that they had, or the twist that they have in the game. And that was just something that I thought for sure. And a lot of people complained about that, which I think is definitely why, you know, episode 2 of season 2 was like, all right, here you go, insane sequence that doesn't even show up in the game. You know, Jackson like fighting off all the infected, and then infected breaking through and stuff like that. And it's like, this is actually really cool. And then of course they changed a couple other things around as well. But all of that was really nice. And I was like, that's great. That's fantastic. And I've watched a couple other episodes where, you know, they kind of skipped over a few things. It's like, oh, okay, you know, they haven't done it. I haven't caught up. I watched, at this point, there are 2 more episodes left. So by the time I finish, I'm going to be starting on the Nora episode, because I'm just going to watch the last 3 together. And that's, you know, that's just pretty much how I'm doing it. Although I did just hear that the 3rd season isn't even coming out till like 2027 is what they're saying. And I'm like, oh, I was barely, I cared to watch episode 2, and that was only because I wanted to see how that was going to play out. And then I waited like 2 weeks to watch the next 2, and then I was like, well, I'll just watch it when it's done. It's like, now I got to wait 2 years for it. That's crazy. But anyway, the limitations that they have because of, you know, hey, we got to spend money on making these sets look the way they do in the game, which does something for sure. I think the live action element, when you recreate it, and it's like, wow, they actually rebuilt the sets. You know, I mean, heck, the Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City movie is a great example of that. And it was like, hey, we're recreating the RPD. We're recreating like the signs and stuff from, you know, the remake of RE2 when you're at the gas station, where it's just the big, you know, Raccoon City sign. It's like, oh, this, you know, this stuff looks amazing. It's actually more entertaining to see it done and recreate it in live action. Like, that's great compared to seeing it in CG, and it's like, okay, well, yeah, it's kind of CG, just in a sense, just like the games are. But it does do something a little bit different when it's in live action, and that leads to Fallout. Fallout is one of those things where I wouldn't have even thought to do that in live action. If it was like, if I was given the option, of course it would be great to do it, and it almost fits. It's one of those things, because of how it's so set in like the nostalgic pseudo 50s, you know, altered 50s style, it almost makes sense to do it in live action. But I would never have expected that, like, from a Fallout show. Like, of course, everything's live action, so that's another part of this topic where it's like, I feel like they limit themselves by constantly being like, we have to do live action. Of course, it comes out amazing sometimes. You know, The Last of Us can do amazing recreations of sets and locations and stuff like that. And Fallout is like absolutely god tier. I'm like, this is like literally just watching someone do the game. Like, it's crazy how good they did with that, from the visuals of the characters to the literal locations. Everything about that was like perfect, and I'm very excited to see what happens, you know, going into season 2. But it's really interesting to be like, wow, they did a phenomenal, almost I would say perfect job with that show, and just the way it looks going into it live action, including, you know, like some of the sort of desert segments where you're just walking through the wasteland and like the dude that was like out of water and stuff, and I'm like, that 100% makes me think of Fallout 3, where it's like not the cannibal spot, but the other random little blocks of houses where it's like, here's just like 2 or 3 houses just standing still, and you know, it'll be like one is like halfway blown apart, and then you'll just see like the frame of like another house, and then there'll just be like 2 or 3 houses that are still standing. That's how it felt actually watching the show. And like characters will go into buildings and there's, you know, sand all over the place because they're in like sort of a deserty location. It's like, this is insanely well done. But then there's other elements where it's like, all right, you got to do some of this other stuff CG. Also, if it was all CG, would it be easier to do some of these things? That's basically a guarantee. But it's really interesting. And of course, when I say CG, I mean like 3D animation, doing it like an actual anime. I would love to see that for Resident Evil, but actual anime takes a super long time to do. Like if you're doing like hand-drawn animation, that takes like an eternity to actually do that, unless you really got people working on a set schedule. So I would love to see it. I think it would just fit for Resident Evil. I don't know why. I think a great, well-drawn anime for Resident Evil would just be absolutely amazing. I think it could be on par with like Castlevania and stuff. Like the animation for that show is incredibly well done. Both seasons, or both versions of the show, I should say, are really well done anime wise. I would love to see that for Resident Evil. Obviously it wouldn't go nearly as insane, except for maybe like, you know, blowing up the Spencer Mansion, or every time they get a rocket at the end of the, you know, end of the game. Of course that would be like insanely well animated. But other than that, it could be, you know, fairly simple. They could put so much detail, and once again, oh man, there's so many things you could do with it being CG or with it being animated that could work if you're, you know, playing around and doing like the fixed camera angles and stuff like that. Granted, of course, you could do that in live action. I just don't think that's something they would ever do. You know, it's just one of those weird things where it's like, it might not translate as well in live action. It would for me, but it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, we kind of had to change this, or we kind of had to change that, because obviously the storytelling of a game versus a show, they'll switch things around a bit. But there's something about the middle ground of animation, or even doing it like in CG, where it changes just enough to where you can get away with doing stuff like that. And it's not that they would do it like the entire time the whole thing would be fixed camera angles. That would be insane, but also absolutely amazing if they did it in CG, and then they're like, here's like the special edition version where all the cameras are just moved into the corners, and it's like, it's the same show, just done at different camera angles. They would never do that, but that would be amazing. That would obviously be for like just really for the fans, but it would be super artistic. I think a lot of people would enjoy that, even if they aren't fans of, you know, the classic fixed camera angles. I think that would just be so unique. People would actually enjoy it. But there's no way that would be the main way they do it. It would have to be a very specialty thing, like, yep, we did this all in CG like a video game, and then we decided to do like a special edition and move the camera around. It's like, that's how that would actually work. But it's just interesting going through the process of looking at the shows we've had and all the adaptations where it's live action or, you know, CG or anime, and seeing like, there's so many things where I'm like, this could totally work if it was animated. You know, I don't think I would ever expect to see The Last of Us in anime form, but I could see it in CG if it was like a more realistic style. Oddly enough, if it kind of was done in the style of the Resident Evil movies, because all of those have a more realistic CG style to them, I could totally see that for like a Last of Us thing, or most adaptations, if they had that style where they kept it more realistic versus stylized. I could totally see that 100%. Anime-wise, I think it's very specific stories that I could see that play out with. I think Devil May Cry is a great example for how great anime looks when you get to like, you know, really over-the-top action and stuff. And we'll see, you know, going into season 2, how they handle that as well. So I'm looking forward to that. But I could easily see it with Resident Evil. But I don't know if I could say the same thing. And obviously, I'm just speaking on something that would never happen. But if Dino Crisis were to get like an adaptation, like the first game was adapted into a TV show or even a movie, I would hope TV show. That's another thing with adaptations. You know, there's many topics when it comes to adaptations, because I think all adaptations should probably just be TV shows, unless it's something like Dungeons and Dragons where they just told their own story just in that world. It's like, okay, if you're making it up, you can totally do that. They could have done that with Fallout, but they were like, oh, we're going to make a TV show and it's its own story set within the world. It's like, yes, you can do that. But once again, that's a different topic versus, you know, how adaptations should be made. Maybe that'll, you know, I'll do that as a different video on how they should actually be making them. But doing it in kind of an animated form, CG form versus live action, I think just different stories would work. And I don't think Dino Crisis I could see in anime form. And maybe it's just the fact that Dino Crisis is, in a sense, it feels like a much lonelier game. It's kind of the same as Resident Evil, but I do feel like in Dino Crisis, you talk to people less. You do more as you go through, and it's been forever since I played the first game, but you start to run into people more as the game continues. But I feel like you're so on your own, and it's, the dinosaur element of it. I almost think the CG realistic look would make them scarier. I think zombies can be scary no matter what. I mean, heck, we've got a bunch of zombie anime anyway, so I have a lot of examples to be like, yeah, I've seen a million zombie anime. You can do a good job and have an anime zombie look incredibly terrifying and definitely make it work. And how they, especially if you're going RE2 and RE3 where you have, we'll call them the randos out there who just die, and it's like, oh man, that's terrible. Like, we can get some good shots of that stuff in anime form. But for Dino Crisis, you see like one person actually die in the whole game. It's like, you can just make it CG and just make it like scary because it's you by yourself, or Regina, of course, in this case, for the most part by herself, and then dinosaurs are like popping up here and there, and it freaks you out. Jurassic Park, just make them more live action, and I feel like that style fits better for Dino Crisis. I think different stories obviously could take on different mediums. Like I said, I wouldn't expect to ever see Fallout or The Last of Us done in a full-on anime style, but I could see a CG, like 3D animation. That I feel like that will work better for those stories. And obviously everybody's different. I'm sure people have different concepts where it's like, especially with all the CG movies we've had, I'm sure some people will be like, it would be kind of weird to see Resident Evil done in full-on 2D. But I just feel like it would work so well to do that in, like, obviously the anime would have to look really good, but I just feel like especially because the characters are so like color coordinated and stuff, like Jill and like her, two-tone blue, and you got Chris. Obviously, once again, it's an adaptation, so they'd have to actually blend the stories, have the characters interact a little bit more. But with them all having like the different colors and the way the squad actually looks, granted, most of them you don't really see too much, but everyone has like their own specific design look and stuff like that. Just like, if you're going with Devil May Cry, Dante is like full on red and everything. Virgil is blue. Lady has like the white and black look. We'll see what happens if they, throw in Trish. She technically just has black with blonde hair. But the characters are so different and they stand out so much, including the boss enemies and the demons and stuff, that it's easy to do that in animated form and just make it look good. Granted, they do a lot of like 3D CG. I don't think Resident Evil would need to do that because you could keep it fairly simple, but this is obviously just me off the dome with like how they can make it work. I'm sure in some way, shape, or form there'd be some 3D animation. Like, they're not going to 2D draw the entire mansion. Something in there's going to be 3D. It's almost like guaranteed at this point. But if it was fully CG, just like the movies have been for years now, I'd be perfectly happy with that. They've done so much with those CG movies for Resident Evil that I could easily see them just being like, all right, here's the Spencer Mansion. Just redesign the whole thing in CG and just let it be amazing. That's all you got to do. We've got quite literally every major character done in CG at this point. I think the only person that has like never appeared in a CG movie as far as like the main players has been Wesker, because he was dead and like they never show him in the movies. And I think, I can't remember. I think Barry is not in one, because I don't believe Barry was even in Death Island. I can't recall right now, but I don't think Barry has showed up in one of the CG movies either. So he's like the only character. We've had Jill, Claire, like all the main playable characters. Everyone's been there. Even Rebecca finally got to actually like participate in something. Like, I lost my mind when Rebecca finally showed up in a CG movie in the timeline that was like after Resident Evil 1, because I'm like, we've never had anything canonical for her character for like over a decade. And when she finally showed up in a CG movie, I was like, holy crap, that's amazing. And she looked great. And then I thought she looked worse in Death Island. I just want to throw that out there. I thought her design in whatever the last one, I can never remember the order or names of these movies, honestly. But I thought she looked worse in the new one than she did in the last one. I was like, it feels like she's a little off from her like classic design. I thought they had like a perfect update for her when she first showed up in whatever the other CG movie was. But that's just one of those elements, that's a minor thing. But I think when it comes to adaptations, it always depends. But I think CG, we're going, animation wise, I think CG can work for literally everything. It might be a little bit more difficult. Well, there's no way it's more difficult than 2D animation. But I think CG would work best if that was like the route that we took. I understand why so many things are done in live action, because it's like, oh, it's live action. And we still have that really weird stigma where not only would it be animated, even if it's like 3D animation, it's still animated. If it's 2D animation, like, oh, it's anime. Like, either way, it's like seen as still for kids for some idiotic reason. And on top of that, it's a video game thing done in CG or done in 2D animation. It's like, oh, that's like double kid time. And it's like, I don't know how long it'll take before people stop being so stupid with that. Like, it's very odd, but animation is still just looked at as like, animation for kids. And it's like, I don't know how many times people need to recognize like adult anime exists and adult things can exist in CG. It's super weird. It's like, it's only mature if it's live action or in a book. Like, that's how people act, and it's the weirdest thing in the world. But that's a big part of why so many things are done in live action, because it's like, you could have done this a million times better. Even if it was the Resident Evil live action movies, I would almost guarantee those movies would be better if they were done in CG, because the action would be cooler. The way that they go through the story could be told in a better way. I mean, heck, that last movie, or at least the sixth movie, if we're going like in just the Mila Jovovich series, that movie had so many horrific edits. I highly recommend just looking at the sequence of her on a motorcycle. Just watch a review. Everyone talks about it. Like, it's shocking that they let those be the edits for that film. But just watch a review. I promise it'll come up within the first couple minutes, because it pops up within the first couple minutes of the actual film. The cuts are ridiculous. You wouldn't have to do all that with CG. Or at the very least, you could just design and rig up the character to do what you want. You don't have to cut like that. You'll be okay. You don't have to go off of the limits of like the human body. And especially considering they were utilizing a character that had like superhuman abilities, that's another giant aspect of it. Like, there's just so much that you limit yourself on. Even if it looks amazing, even if it's a great recreation of a set or a costume or a location that's at least similar to something in the games, you're still limiting yourself in some way, shape, or form. Obviously, some do it better than others. I think Fallout, like I said, is like the perfect example. And also that comes from, kind of the other side of the adaptation where it's its own story. So it didn't have to be like The Last of Us, like, oh, I wish there were more infected, because I know what's supposed to happen here. I know where, how these characters are supposed to be attacked, or how many are supposed to attack, or the fact that they're supposed to fight somebody at least. And then it's just like, oh, but it's just missing. It's like, I doubt it would have been if this whole show was done in CG. So something I just wanted to talk about and bring up the idea of like, what is really better when it comes to adaptations? I think some adaptations are great as they are, and it's just, once again, the whole live action element is just how things are. People are going to see live action as the more mature way to do it. I mean, heck, Star Wars is a great example of that alone. Star Wars is one of the most popular franchises on the face of this planet, and the amount of times I have to constantly just randomly throw out, please watch Clone Wars, for Star Wars fans is like, it's ridiculous because it's animated, and people for years, over a decade, you could have watched Clone Wars, and people were just like, it's animated, I'm just not gonna do it. And it's like, that's literally some of the best Star Wars we've ever had, has just been the CG animated Clone Wars show. But people miss out because it's like, I don't want to look at that. Like, I don't really want to get into that. It's kiddie if it's this thing. It's animated, so it's it's not really as mature, or it's just not like, I'm not gonna check that out. And that's just the stigma we have. On top of the fact that, once again, these are video game adaptations, and a lot of people, of course, don't know tons of video games. Sometimes you know and sometimes you won't. So it really depends. If GTA got like a live action thing, obviously everyone would be like, oh, the game, or something crazy like that, which would be pointless because it's GTA. But it's interesting. It's an interesting spot to be in, and I would love to know your thoughts on that, because like I said, it's the stigma that makes it live action. Because we have like the God of War show coming, and I'm like, that should be animated. 100%. I think that should be like animated because of the stuff. When I think of like crazy fast motion, that's when I go like, you should do 2D. Because even when you do 3D stuff, you're still limited to certain things where it would just take longer to do like the whole setup. And well, I guess technically animation wise, it would still take longer anyway. But the point is, when I think like over the top, absolute insanity, I'm like, just go full 2D. Just make it like, just give me some stuff where I can just pause it and boom, it's a wallpaper. Or if you throw the money out there and you throw the time in, we could get stuff like Secret Level. That can't happen. For anyone who does not know this, the reason we can't get stuff like that is because it costs like millions upon millions of dollars. It was like, it's insane how much it costs. Because that's the company that did, if I'm not mistaken, it's the same company that did the old Knights of the Old Republic CG videos. And it's like, yeah, we can do those like once every couple years for like whatever new expansion that they're making. But I remember the guy saying, like everyone always says, like, why don't you guys make a full Star Wars movie like this? And it's like, well, that's because that 7-minute little trailer we did cost $3 million effing for 7 minutes. So it was like, yeah, we can't do like an hour and a half long film. Like, it's just not gonna happen. So it's unfortunate. But if somebody insanely rich, if Elon wants to do something really valuable, he could just throw some money towards somebody to make like the ultimate CG video game movie. That would be great. But those are very, very expensive to get like really incredibly well detailed CG films. And that's why, not to knock on the Resident Evil movies that we've had, but they do have a very like simple CG animation style. It works for them because it's realistic enough, and it kind of fits in line with the games, which are, I'm gonna use the term grounded. I know how crazy that sounds for any video game, but in a sense, that's grounded compared to, like I said, if I'm going Devil May Cry, Resident Evil is fairly grounded. Not when you get to a boss fight, of course, but overall, it's fairly grounded. You're just walking and shooting some stuff. But it's an interesting era to be in. Adaptations are here to stay. I mean, and I consider that a good thing. Sadly, Until Dawn was the most recent bad thing we had, and before that was Borderlands. So it's not like everything's been great, but it's been a great couple years. For the most part, we've been doing pretty good. But I would love to know your thoughts on adaptations and how you think they should be done. Should we go the route of just full CG? I don't think it'll ever even happen, but once again, I think I probably ended up with like 2 or 3 other video topics just involving adaptations and how the future of that is going to go. But I would love to know your thoughts on, should video game adaptations stick to CG, whether it's CG or just full-on animation. What are your thoughts on that? Does it work better in that sense? I think overall, yes. I don't think we have enough evidence for me to be like, here's 100 million examples of it being better, because no one's really doing it. Like Arcane is an example, which almost doesn't even count because that's in no way, shape, or form what the game is like. But it's just one of those things, like, I think it would be better if we just went CG or anime with video game adaptations so that we could get more of the actual worlds. But because of the stigma behind live action and stuff like that, we won't. But that'll be its own topic, because that's 100% a different part of this conversation for adaptations and what they are. But we'd love to know your thoughts on it. So please put your comments down in the comment section below. And of course, thanks for watching.